Hello, and welcome to the CAP Today webinar for Thursday, March 20th. I'm Bob McGonigal, the publisher of CAP Today, and I'll be your host, and I'll moderate a question and answer session after our formal presentation. Today's webinar is entitled U.S. Payers and CGP, that's Comprehensive Genomic Profiling, Equip Your Lab for Reimbursement of CGP with TSO or TrueSight Oncology Comprehensive, the first FDA-approved distributed CGP assay. This is a very important webinar, as I'm sure you all understand, and we're very grateful to Illumina, and we want to acknowledge Illumina for their support. This is made possible by a special educational grant from them. I not only want to acknowledge that, but I want to thank them for their support in bringing you this very important program that couldn't be more timely. We have a trio of very, very distinguished speakers today, and let me introduce them now briefly. Brian Piening is a doctorate level scientist, associate member at the Cancer Immuno-Genomics Laboratory, at the Chiles Research Institute, Providence Cancer Institute, and the program director of Providence Genomics. Cristyn Lauer is a principal consultant with 2C Ventures, LLC, and it's nice to have her with us. She's got a lot of expertise to bring to bear on the topic. And the speaker who will kick off our session today is Dr. John Fox, who's the Senior Medical Director for Market Access at Illumina. Now, before we begin, however, I want to tell you a couple more things that will enhance your enjoyment. We've recorded today's session for purposes of comprehensive coverage and balance and timing. So you're going to get to see a recorded session. Joining us in the recorded session will be my friend Pierre Del Moral, who's the Director of Clinical Marketing and Market Development with Illumina, and he and I worked together 2 days ago to do the NGS roundtable for CAP Today. So it's old home week for Pierre and I. You'll see a pod on your screen that's labeled Q&A. You can use that to request technical help from us at any time, either with audio or video. And also use that Q&A pod to make your comments and ask your questions of our distinguished panel and others, and we'll get to those, as I said, after our recording has finished. You should expect to see some follow-up emails, both from ourselves and from our sponsor. So please be aware that's quite natural and normal. Finally, I have to say always in my disclaimer, which is that CAP Today does not endorse any products or services that may be mentioned today. And my remarks, of course, are purely personal. They're not to be taken as policy of the CAP Today or the College of American Pathologists. And so with that, I want to welcome you all. And let's now, Robbie and John Fox, begin our presentation.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is John Fox. On behalf of Illumina and my co-presenters, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Equipping Your Lab for Reimbursement of CGP with TSO Comprehensive, the first FDA-approved distributed CGP assay. A couple of disclosures. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I am going to read a couple of sentences. This content is informational only and is subject to change without notice. And the healthcare provider or user is solely responsible for determining appropriate treatment for the patient based on the unique medical needs of each patient and the independent judgment of the provider. Our agenda today is pretty simple. We're going to talk about some of the unmet needs in the diagnosis and management of patients with metastatic non-small cell lung cancer, and then the value of CGP decentralized testing. We're going to talk about the experience of one of my co-presenters in a regional lab and their experience in optimizing CGP reimbursement and laboratory initiated CGP testing. We'll talk about the newly FDA-approved TSO Oncology Comprehensive Overview. And then finally, we'll talk about the difference in coverage between LDTs and IVDs and how to engage with payers to ensure reimbursement. So I'm going to pose this question. Do we have a quality problem in the accurate diagnosis and treatment of metastatic non-small cell lung cancer? This paper is from Helen Sadek, Daryl Pritchard, and others from the Personalized Medicine Coalition. They performed a study that was published in 2022 and looked at thousands of patients who had testing for metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. They used integrated claims and laboratory data and found that about 50% of patients at the time of treatment initiation, and those are in the kind of the orange on the left-hand side, about 50% of patients didn't have test results available at the time treatment was initiated. There were a host of reasons for that, including the test wasn't ordered, the test results weren't available, there was insufficient tissue, but 50% of patients didn't have test results available. Of the remaining 50% of patients who did, 7% of the total, or 14% of those with a test result, were appropriate for targeted treatment, but didn't get it. 6% of the total and 12% of those who had test results were appropriate for immunotherapy, but didn't receive it, leaving about 36% of patients who got treatment that was concordant with their test results. So only about 64% of patients didn't benefit from a molecular diagnosis and molecular results in their treatment. What are the consequences of that? There are several papers, more than these three, but I'll highlight these three that summarize the overall survival impact of discordant treatment in metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. There are three studies from Scott, Stricker, and Bhandari that have all been published in the last couple of years, and they show that for patients who receive therapies that were concordant with their test results, that their survival ranged between 27 and 30 months. For those patients who had discordant treatment, their test results showed that they should get one treatment, but they received another. The survival was between 15 and 20 months. So somewhere between 6 and 12 months of life years life months are lost if patients don't receive concordant treatment. How does that all add up? How do we put that all together? Based on SEER data, there are about 85,000 patients annually who are diagnosed with metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. If only half of those receive a test result and half of those patients are appropriate for targeted therapy but don't receive it, then that means about 21,000, or 1 in 4 patients, don't receive appropriate therapy, with the consequence of 6 to 12 months of life lost from wrong therapy. So in answer to the question, do we have a quality problem? I would suggest that we do. I'll leave that for you to make your own conclusions or draw your own conclusions. So here's the conundrum. Patients, well, the first problem is we've highlighted right now that a lot of patients don't get test results, but there are other set of patients who, because families and patients don't want to wait to start treatment until those results are available, it forces uninformed treatment that can lead to wrong therapy, shortened survival, and wasted spend on drugs that we could have predicted weren't going to work. What's the solution to that? I'm not suggesting these are the only solutions, but the primary solution to the conundrum above is to get faster test results. And there are really two mechanisms for doing that. First, pathologist-directed reflex testing, so that if a pathologist knows that the patient has metastatic cancer, they can initiate not only testing, but also testing that's concordant with the guidelines to make sure that all the recommended biomarkers that are appropriate for that patient are tested. And then second mechanism for ensuring that the results are available at the time that patient initiates treatment is to do in-house testing. So both reflex testing and in-house testing could help resolve the conundrum of patients wanting treatment before test results are available. So the next question is simply, is that possible? Can you operationalize that? And to answer that question, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Piening, who is the program director for Providence Genomics.
Thanks for the introduction, John. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the program we've developed at the Providence healthcare system. So if you don't know, Providence is one of the largest not-for-profit healthcare systems in the U.S., largely based on the West Coast, and we have a centralized genomics, CLIA genomics facility based out of Portland, Oregon. And then just my disclosures that what I'm going to present are my opinions and don't represent that of the sponsor. So about 5 years ago, we built a program focused around improving access to comprehensive genomic profiling and delivering those results faster. And so we developed a test called ProvSeq, which is a 500 plus DNA and RNA hybrid LDT assay, with the goal to use across the spectrum of different cancer types to identify individuals that would qualify for treatment with targeted therapies and or immunotherapies. And so as John mentioned, there's still, pretty large gaps in access to genomic testing for patients that would qualify for those testing via guidelines. That's doubly true for comprehensive genomic profiling. Our program is based upon comprehensive genomic profiling for a couple different reasons. One of the main reasons is conservation of tissue, so getting all actionable targets assessed within one single assay is important, and then also getting results to providers, comprehensive results to providers faster, as well as related to reimbursement policy. So often insurers will reimburse for just the first test. You want to make sure all the targets that are important for the patient are included in that first test. And so, as John alluded to, we developed a protocol that was associated with pathologist-directed ordering of testing for all advanced cancer patients, with the goal of getting results back to the treating oncologist at the time of that initial visit with the patient. And so that's quite different from how genomics is utilized and ordered traditionally, where usually the pathologist performs the diagnostic process, then the patient meets with their treating oncologist, and at that point usually the genomic testing is ordered, which results in a delay of getting those results back for clinical treatment decisions. And so the goal is to speed this up through putting the testing in the hands of the pathologist. And so looking at the first couple of years of this study, we found a couple things. So number one, we compared pathologist-directed testing to non-pathologist-directed testing within the health system, as well as commercial send-out testing within the health system. And just looking at the time from specimen collection to NGS report release, we saw a significant decrease in days in getting that report released in the pathologist-directed setting, which performed better than non-pathologist-directed, as well as commercial send-out testing. And so, whereas the time to complete these assays within the lab across those settings are generally very similar, we've gained, additional time by getting that test performed earlier in the treatment process. And so, as you'd expect, looking across a panel of a few thousand tests across a variety of tumor types, we see characteristic mutations across a wide variety of genes. This is just listing some of the actionable biomarkers, but as you would expect, things like hotspots for BRAF mutation in melanoma, high TMB across a variety of different tumor types. And because we're testing a broad panel across all different tumor types, we see rare, highly actionable mutations in genes like NTRK1, 2, and 3 that really occur across a broad range of tumor types, which really was one of the reasons we wanted to make sure comprehensive genomic profiling was available to everybody. One of the things we observed, we compared this cohort assessed via comprehensive genomic profiling what the actionability would look like if they were assessed with a smaller gene panel, and we used historical panel composition to make this comparison, and we observed a pretty dramatic response, or pretty dramatic change in the actionability. So with CGP, over half of the patients had at least one actionable biomarker in their report. This is for advanced non-small cell lung cancer. And that was compared to looking at the small panel, where we only saw 21% had an actionable biomarker in their report. So pretty dramatic difference in the number of patients that could be considered for a precision medicine pathway. We then looked at outcomes for patients treated with this pathologist-directed CGP program versus those tested with small panel testing, and we observed a pretty dramatic change in overall survival in the CGP arm, likely due to the ability to use more precision therapies and immunotherapies that were associated with potentially better outcomes. And so the first couple of years of this study were done where testing was performed under a research protocol at no cost to the patient. Over time, CGP testing has been more widely accepted for coverage across the field, and so with the ending of this study, we transitioned to a billing model where we receive coverage via the MolDX program related to Medicare reimbursement. In 2021, just a couple months ago, our homologous recombination deficiency add-on ProfSeq HRD was approved, and so that's a big step in any in-house developed workflow. With the note that commercial plans may or may not follow that coverage. Often they do, but there's some settings where they don't. And then recently we've been working on claims analysis as we've switched to a full billing model to understand in which settings we see coverage for CGP testing, and which settings we see potential challenges. And so again, this is a lab developed test. And so, coverage is obtained largely through processes like MolDX, and working with private insurers. And so from our preliminary analysis, we've seen a high percentage of cases receive coverage via Medicare and managed Medicare. And for commercial coverage, it's somewhat of a mixed bag. It's very payer dependent. And I'll go into some of the reasons we see for denials in that setting, which some of those are actually, I think, related to the pathologist directed testing workflow as well. So this is just looking at some of the reasons we saw for claims denials. Number one was medical records. So we saw a high number of denials where the payer did not receive a specific piece of documentation that they required. Digging into that further, that seems largely due to putting the test ordering way up front in the hands of the pathologist, where some of those documents are not, may or may not have been part of the medical record at the time the test was ordered and pre-auth was assessed. That largely can be alleviated through the appeals process, and so that's largely what we've seen. Those documentation become available later on, and then are can be submitted to the payer. But other reasons we've seen were associated with things like medical necessity, kind of what we were mentioning, duplicate testing, more than one test on a patient over time, et cetera. But in general, like what we've seen, running an in-house comprehensive genomic profiling assay via LDT We've seen, really strong increases in the number of actionable biomarkers detected across our patient population. And using a pathologist-directed workflow, we are able to get those results in the hands of the treating physician much faster. There's some challenges still we're working on in terms of how to run that type of program in the setting of pre-authorization workflows, et cetera. And then, lastly, reimbursement for CGP has in the LDT setting has largely improved, but we still face some challenges in the payer landscape. Some of that could be alleviated by switching to CDX assay. I think that's something we're going to hear more about. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We will now move to the overview of the TruSight Oncology Comprehensive Test. My name is Pierre Del Moral, and I'm the Director of Clinical Marketing at Illumina. TruSight Oncology Comprehensive has been approved last year in August of 2024. By implementing this test in your lab, you can generate from each sample a comprehensive, clinically actionable genomic profile, which in turn will enable targeted therapeutic options and clinical trial enrollment options for your patients. Because this test will be implemented in-house, you'll be able to turn around your results very quickly to meet the timeline of the physicians you serve. This test has been thoroughly reviewed by the FDA and is now approved, so you can confidently rely on the results from this test. Because it is FDA approved, it only requires a streamlined verification compared to a cumbersome validation process for an LDT. Because of its approval as well, it will help you navigate the ever-changing regulatory landscape. This test is FDA approved with pan-tumor CDX approval, which will help democratize access with a clear path to reimbursement with both private and public payers. TruSight Oncology Comprehensive is the NGS IVD assay that detects variants in 517 genes from nucleic acids extracted from FFT tissue and sequenced on the Illumina NextSeq 550Dx instrument. This test detects single nucleotide variants, MNVs, indels from DNA, as well as fusions in 24 genes and splice variants in 1 gene from RNA. This test also reports TMB, or tumor mutational burden. The TSO Comprehensive has been approved with 2 companion diagnostics. The first one to detect NTRK 1, 2, and 3 fusions for all solid tumors for Vitrakvi or larotrectinib. Also for RET fusion detection in non-small cell lung cancer for Retavmo or selpercatinib. This test also has approval for small DNA variants tumor profiling claim. Here is the overview of our sample to answer workflow, starting from FFPE, then moving to DNA and RNA extraction to produce libraries for up to 7 patient samples and 2 control per batch, a positive and NCC controls. The library prep and enrichment process takes 2.5 days, and the libraries are then sequenced on the NextSeq 550Dx system, as well as generating results report on the same instrument. There is no need to purchase a separate server for it. The end-to-end workflow time takes 4 to 5 days to generate an easy-to-interpret results report. Here is an overview of this results report with companion diagnostics results at the top and additional variants reported in the middle section for cancer mutations with evidence of clinical significance, and on the bottom section for cancer mutations with evidence of potential clinical significance. All these results are based on a clinical knowledge base that includes curated drug labels, clinical guidelines, clinical trials, and peer-reviewed literature information. This will increase your confidence in the treatment decisions made based on these results. But that's not it. Illumina will support you through your implementation. An FAS will come on site and help you through wet lab instruction and to help your lab perform an assessment run and provide a training certification to your staff. We'll also provide you with a verification protocol to get you up and running quickly. You'll be able also to access educational assets that can be shared with clinicians through our VIP portal, CGP Lighthouse. Our technical support is available 24/5. We also have a team of experts in medical affairs to help you answer your medical inquiries, whether this question is related to biomarkers or on the clinical utility of CGP. You can connect with them by submitting an inquiry through our portal or an email by directly connecting them at medinfo@illumina.com. You could also schedule a consultation with them at that same email address. We understand that test coverage is really important to you, and TSO Comprehensive has a path to reimbursement as an FDA-approved IVD test with CDX claims. IVD CGP tumor profiling assays with CDX claims across solid tumors are covered for eligible Medicare beneficiaries throughout the US under the National Coverage Determination NCD 90.2. Commercial coverage for assays with pan-cancer CDX indications increases by more than a third of US commercially insured lives as compared to assays without CDX claims. That would be an FDA-cleared assay or an LDT. Our dedicated Illumina market access team is working with payers to further expand reimbursement of CGP. You've always had what it takes. Now you have what you need. We're excited to introduce to you our US FDA-approved test, TrueSight Oncology Comprehensive Assay, and I will now hand it over to Cristyn Lauer.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Cristyn Lauer, and I'm Market Access and Reimbursement Principal Consultant at 2C Ventures. But prior to being in consulting, I worked at various labs and one that specialized in CGP testing. So I've spent a lot of time working on comprehensive genomic profiling, both for access, coverage, and reimbursement. So today I want to cover coding for TrueSight Oncology test, as well as walk through some best practices around payer engagement and getting reimbursed. So here's the typical disclosure. The opinions expressed during this presentation are those of the speaker and may not represent the opinions of Illumina. Okay, so starting with the coding information. So coding is a fundamental for proper reimbursement. So for TrueSight Oncology, we're pleased to share that they do have a PLA code, which is 0543U, which will be effective April 1st, so right around the corner. Prior to this, CPT code 81455 best describes the test and is available. PLA codes, if you're not familiar with, are unique proprietary codes that are signed to specific laboratory tests, and they can't be used by other tests. So it's unique and specific. But in addition to PLA codes, there are payers now that are requiring Z codes to also be put on claims, and those Z codes are simply identifiers. So they don't replace a CPT code, but they actually are in conjunction with a PLA code and required to be put on certain claims. These claims typically are Medicare, the Palmetto jurisdiction requires this. UHC is requiring Z codes, Humana, and then select regional payers. Illumina has done a nice job creating a guide, if you're not familiar with it, to be able to register on the DEX system to share the Z code across your lab as well as them as a manufacturer. So you just simply go in there and register, and it takes a couple minutes to request to Illumina to share the Z code through that process. So pretty simple, but coding, as you know, can be important to actually making sure it's accurate and the most correct codes when billing the payers. So coverage, we've touched a little bit about the importance of coverage, and more there are medical policies out there that define the coverage of laboratory testing. And Medicare is critical to the success of coverage of any oncology testing because there's a large patient portion that resides within the Medicare population. With TrueSight Oncology comprehensive testing, because it is an FDA-approved companion diagnostic test, it will be available under the National Coverage Determination moving forward. We're just waiting back for information from CMS. And then this will supersede any local good coverage determinations that are out there. Furthermore, this allows then or will enable the Medicare Advantage organizations, so all the Medicare Advantage plans, which is a growing population, to then be required to cover and pay what original Medicare does. So this is a policy and a regulation, which is quoted on this slide. So this is a huge advantage. So once something is actually established coverage with a original Medicare, then the Medicare Advantage plans have to follow suit. Now, it doesn't mean that Medicare Advantage plans can't put in operational requirements like prior authorizations, or as Brian alluded to, additional medical records that they want to see. So they can still use utilization management controls to ensure that the test is being properly used. Furthermore, there's actually coverage under various LCDs within the MAC. So Palmetto, Novitas, and NGS for TSO or for FDA-approved CDX indications. So if we look deeper at the landscape of coverage of comprehensive genomic profiling, we touched a little bit on MolDX, Novitas, NGS, and then Medicare Advantage. So the three MACs above, they do have LCDs that cover companion diagnostics, which TSO would fall within. So MolDX actually has determined coverage for this test. Novitas and First Coast are often paying on a claim-by-claim basis based on the fact that it's CDX, and then National Government Services also has an LCD. Commercial payers and Medicaid medical policy and coverage for CGP, which and would be applicable to TrueSight Oncology, varies by plan or by the state. So commercial payer coverage. One of the important initiatives that I have worked on currently, actually, as well as previously, is engaging with commercial payers around why this test is medically necessary, not only for TSO, but for CGP in general. And this is really critical because a lot of times the payers, as you can imagine, are dealing with many tests, many drugs, DME services, all sorts of things to try to figure out what should be covered and what should not. So actually being proactive with the payers and sharing scientific evidence can be of value to them. Plus, hearing from any lab providers that are providing this test, or even ordering healthcare providers that are interested in using this test. That surround sound can help build the case of why this test is medically necessary. With commercial payers, a lot of times they will, like we said, vary in policy. So they might not have all the exact same policies. So it's important to understand the different criteria that they require. For example, they want documentation to show that a patient might have metastatic disease. The other thing is that some payers, especially on the commercial side or the Medicare Advantage, might require prior authorizations. And in order for successful claims to be covered, you want to make sure that you're attaining those prior authorizations or meeting those requirements so that claims go through smoothly. Finally, on really good news, as Brian alluded to, one of the difference between an LDT and an FDA CDX approved test is there are some advantages on medical payers policies right now that cover any FDA approved CDX indication. They're actually using the FDA companion website to look at which tests are being covered because of the inherent clinical utility within these tests that it's matched to a specific drug. So when you look further at commercial payer coverage, I just pulled some of the medical policies for some of the top plans. They do definitely vary, but as a whole, you can see if you look all the way to the right, the coverage type, majority of them are covering CDX indications. There are payers like Cigna that aren't concerned about whether the test is FDA CDX or not, as long as the patient has metastatic disease, it's a CGP test, and it's well validated. Other payers like Blue Cross Blue Shield North Carolina, who use the LBM Avalon, which is a policy shop to develop policy, looks at if the panel actually has TMB in it And if it does, they typically will cover that panel despite the size of the gene, or if it's FDA approved or an LDT. So in general, you could see that actually TrueSight oncology testing by Illumina should be covered in many cases with the large payers as long as the criteria is met. Another key tactic for payer engagement is contracting. So I'm not sure for the audience here today if there is contracting strategies that you all have with payers, but in-network contracting can offer benefits for your lab. That includes favorable rates or rates that you can predict on what you're getting versus trying to guess what they're going to pay in or out of network, a dedicated provider representative for you that will help work on claims, and definitely faster payments. So usually sometimes I've seen from my personal experience that payments can come quickly from 30 days versus being out of network or not in contract and can sometimes lead up to 9 to 11 months. So this is an important tactic to gauge with payers to see if there's an opportunity to contract, or if you have testing or currently in a contract to add additional new products to a contract to make sure that there's a clear and established rate terms. When negotiating with payers, it's pretty standard that they will look towards Medicare rates. So oftentimes with our new PLA code for Illumina's test, it will eventually be on the clinical lab fee schedule, so they'll be able to see the PLA code rate. In the absence of that, you can use a Medicare EOB to negotiate with the payer, of course, redacted, showing that what Medicare is paying for your test, and negotiate with them to actually get a contract rate at or around Medicare. Typically, we see the commercial lines of business with payers and Medicare Advantage. Again, reminder that Medicare Advantage is supposed to be paying at Medicare rates outside of a contract. So you want to keep those negotiations around Medicare Advantage, or excuse me, Medicare rates. And then Medicaid sometimes will go a little bit lower, that line of business, just because the state, when they set the rates for any labs, are typically below a Medicare rate. So definitely negotiate that pricing with the payers, and know that a lot of them are looking at Medicare rates as an initial benchmark to the pricing for the test. So in summary, reimbursement and coverage can be really important, but I'll start with the end in mind. Having payer engagement is really important, whether that's reaching out to payers to talk about the medical necessity and the need and the utility of your test. That can actually help continue to build surround sound. But also you want to make sure you have proper coding. You want to understand the current insurance coverage, whether you're creating your own cheat sheets or use guides from the laboratories like Illumina or the manufacturer like Illumina. Understand prior authorization requirements. In-network contracting could be a strategy to help with payment terms, as well as actually having additional payer engagement. And then the appeals process, although nobody likes doing appeals on either side of the fence, both the payer or the lab, appeals can be effective, especially in those Medicare Advantage claims, if we know that they're supposed to be paying for this test because of original Medicare. And it could give an opportunity to either get a higher reimbursement or make sure the test is paid. So with that, I'll end there and see if we can open it up for questions.
Live.
Well, thank you, Cristyn, and thank you, Brian. Thank you, John, and Pierre as well. You've given us a very comprehensive overview of the TrueSight Oncology Comprehensive Genomic Profile and all its many ins and outs in insurance and payment and setting it up quite clinically. So I'm going to begin. I've got a number of questions, many of which I know we won't be able to get around because this is really a plethora. It reminds me of what I'll go through speaking to my tax accountant in a couple of weeks. There's lots of things out there to think about and ask about. But I'm going to start with you, and rather simply, Dr. Fox, if I may, how can Illumina help my laboratory get reimbursed for this TrueSight Oncology Comprehensive Genomic Panel? As we all know, many commercial payers don't want to pay for anything, and they may not be trying, they'll do their best not to pay for something. So
Yeah.
Tell us, Dr. Fox, how Illumina can be of help to us.
Yeah, I think to reiterate many of the things that Cristyn shared, because this is an FDA-approved test with a CDX indication, this is reimbursable by Medicare all the way back to the time that it was approved by the FDA. So we can help labs sort that out if they need help. With the commercial payers, as Cristyn pointed out, the Illumina can help with presenting the evidence, supporting the TSO comprehensive coverage, including the fact that it likely meets their coverage policies already. Cristyn nicely outlined how many payers simply cover tests with the CDX indication. The key point is that the labs have to be contracted, and we can certainly help with that. I do want to help labs through that process, although many of them are experienced. I just want to clarify briefly that because TSO Comprehensive is an FDA-approved test, we can support coverage applications for that, including appeals, for example. For TSO, the RUO device with an LDT that Brian spoke to, because that's a research use only device, we aren't able to help support coverage and payer interactions in that space.
Very good, thank you. That's a very important distinction to make, so I'm glad you pointed that out. And we'll turn now to Brian, who I'm sure institutionally needs to make many of those appeals for payment on LDTs. But before we talk about that, if you care to, I wanted to ask a very detailed laboratory type question, namely, what is your quality not specific rate and your post-sequencing failure rate in general terms? In other words, what is the percent of FFPE sample that successfully receives a comprehensive report?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, so so for our large-scale CGP assay, the QNS rate is really low, about a couple percent. And really, like when we were validating the assay, and launched it, we actually kept around a separate smaller amplicon panel to catch the potential CGP failures. We ended up discontinuing that because we were having such success with the CGP that the amplicon based assay was redundant. So yeah, so overall QNS rate was pretty low in our hands.
That's very nice to hear. And now I'll ask you the same question I asked Dr. Fox. How can laboratories help themselves get reimbursed for comprehensive TSO comprehensive profiling, if in fact they're using also other tests like LDTs to get to some of these same answers?
Yeah, so I think there are different challenges in the reimbursement arena right now, and then actually for majority of payers, LDT based assays are within the scope of their reimbursement guidelines. Others do not, and then in those cases, having a IVD or a CDX indication can help. And then for us, it's a lot of advocacy. So we meet with payers and present them data, and why the upfront test could end up improving overall health for their covered population.
Very good. Let me ask you a question. I'm interested in your opinion and your experience. Which is more difficult, obtaining coverage or persuading oncologists to put themselves in the hand of pathologist-initiated testing?
Yeah. So we developed this study. It was a mixed model.
Okay.
So sites that wanted to put the test in the hands of the pathologist did so, and then others did not want to go that route, and so proceeded, with, standard oncologist-based ordering. For us as, running a research study is great because we have, different, populations that we could then study differences in turnaround time. And then so for the subset that did, relinquish the ordering to the pathologist, they actually really love it, where they expect that report is available to them when they're first meeting with the patient.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Cristyn Lauer, your presentation was enormously interesting to our audience, and I think we could keep you here for a couple of hours if you have the time, but we are restricted on our presentation hour here. But I want to ask you a couple of questions. The first being, talk to us a little bit about restrictions in reimbursement if the order is made while the patient is still regarded as an inpatient versus an outpatient. I know the 14-day rule is a incredible maze for many, but talk about the reimbursement for the order when the patient is an inpatient.
That's an interesting question because I think primarily, and I'll probably look to my colleagues here, that I've dealt with is mostly outpatient setting where it's in the outpatient setting and needs the test versus inpatient. So less have had to deal with that at the 14-day rule because of, the whole issue with DRGs. So,
of course,
but yeah, so primary CGP testing has been used in the outpatient setting, which seems to go a little bit smoother under the Medicare Part B process.
Okay, very good. Brian, would you care to comment on that very same question?
Sure. Yeah. So for patients in the inpatient setting, yeah, absolutely. The test would fall under the 14-day rule, and so the billing would be bundled with the rest of the inpatient services, and that's how we proceed. And the goal is really to get the test done as quickly as possible, as requested by the care team, and so that's not a part we really take into account when we perform testing.
Very good, thank you. Another question for Dr. Fox. Are DevZ codes specific to the lab performing the tests? In other words, would we need to get our own if we adopted this approach?
Yeah, great question. For TSO Comprehensive, because it's a distributable IVD, FDA approved, Illumina obtained a Z code from MolDX. When labs run TSO Comprehensive out of the box without any changes to the test, which would be the standard operating procedure, then labs can apply to MolDX to share our Z code. So straight to the point, then every lab billing TSO Comprehensive in its original format, unaltered, can use the same Z code to bill any MAC using MolDX. On the other hand, labs that are using the TSO 500, like Brian, they have to apply for MolDX, go through a TSO or go through a technology assessment and get their own Z code. So again, if you're using TSO Comprehensive, you'll use the Z code that was awarded to Illumina as the manufacturer. Okay. And there's a process is spelled out in a reimbursement guide that we've put together. It's also spelled out on the MolDX website.
Right. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to mine you at Illumina for all the help and guidance that you can give here. And I'm sure you'll be happy to. We've got many, many people on that will enjoy follow-up from you and your colleagues at Illumina. I did want to ask one question about studies looking at coverage and reimbursement rates of the Illumina TSO versus PGDX. Just very briefly, would you care to take that one, Cristyn?
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the differential factors of TSO Comp, as we discussed, was the FDA CDX approval. So in terms of claims potentially getting paid because there's supporting medical policy for FDA CDX's approval might be different than the other tests. So that would probably be the biggest differentiation. As far as the amount paid, I think it varies per negotiation of contractor or payer. So I couldn't really speak to that exact amount for each different test, but I think the percentage of claims would be in favor for any FDA-approved CDX.
Very good. Brian, from your perspective as a provider, would you like to comment on that same question?
Oh, yeah, I'm probably not the right person to ask.
Okay, John, any comment there?
No, I think Cristyn covered it fine.
I thought she did too. Yes, that sounds really very, very good. We do have some question here, and I'd like to maybe, John, you start it off, and then we'll make it a round robin. And this goes back very early in your presentation. Many patients and even many physicians, including some surgeons, of course, and we can never forget the surgeons also play a role in many of these instances, are very anxious to get treatment underway. There's this sort of thing, I have a condition, I need to get it treated ASAP. Talk me through how that understanding is evolving and has evolved, because certainly I always use the analogy of infectious disease and microbiology. We have to identify the bug, and then we have to identify the treatment that will kill the bug.
Right. Yeah. And these are my own reflections on this topic.
Of course.
I think the challenge today is that the diagnosis does not stop with a histologic diagnosis,
Right.
Especially non-small cell lung cancer, because there are so many genomic variants that reflect oncogenic drivers to these cancer types. You need to understand the genomic diagnosis as well as the histologic diagnosis to afford the right treatment. And as I outlined, there's this conundrum between that exists when patients want to be treated right away, even though they may have only had this cancer. They may have had this cancer for years, and the clinician who knows that they need to wait. And so, as I outlined, I think the idea of doing in-house testing and doing reflex testing are both solutions to that problem of getting the result to the physician as quickly as possible, so that when the oncologist sees the patient for the first time, they have a complete diagnosis, a histologic diagnosis, a radiologic diagnosis, a genomic diagnosis, and then they can initiate treatment during that first visit. And I think what Brian elegantly outlined is that for most of the patients, they can have that diagnosis, that genomic diagnosis available when the oncologist sees the patient for the first time.
Very good. Brian, comment a little bit about that and the importance to patients of having the full information when they walk in and see an oncologist for the first time. It can be a very scary thing, as we all know.
Yeah, and in a prior era, for certain tumor types, there wasn't a lot approved in the first line where that were associated with a genomic biomarker. That's really changed, right? And so having that information up front can be very important in planning, what the treatment strategy is going to be. Just observing cases where we've observed something like an NTRK fusion, which is transformative for the potentially for the care and the the ultimate outcome for those patients. Getting that surfaced initially can really help kind of that oncologist plan what that line's going to be treatment is going to be, and can consider a precision therapy earlier.
Thank you very much. Let me ask a final question to wrap up with, but I think it's going to take us some time to develop. And let me start first with you, Cristyn. I'm sure you see, as we do and have reported, so huge percentages of patients are not really getting the proper biomarker testing for the condition that's diagnosed very early on. It strikes me that many of the things you've discussed today, the reflex testing, laboratory initiated testing, but particularly the TSO Comprehensive genomic profiling, is a way of improving this in an enormously important way in a way that eventually may, in fact, may, I emphasize, be of great savings to morbidity and mortality of patients, but also to the healthcare system. Would you care to comment on a very general question like that?
Yeah, I think it's really important, I think, today with precision in medicine to make sure that we all know that patients are getting treated the best that they can. And we definitely understand more in the oncology space where we can run tests, particularly like in this case for lung cancer,
Mhm.
and make more informed decisions with targeted therapies. And so with that versus, a patient that doesn't have access to that, I think it's really important to the healthcare system because it eliminates that waste and gets better outcomes.
Very good. And Brian, I'll ask you to comment on the same question. I mean, we know that in many cases, there's many, many mutations that can arise, and a comprehensive genomic profiling can be a sort of an efficient one-stop shopping, so to speak, for finding those mutations. Is that your experience so far as you begin this journey?
Yeah, I think that's a general idea. In fact, we're seeing new approvals for new precision therapies all the time, new indications for existing precision therapies. Immunotherapy is its own, very viable treatment strategy. And one thing we've seen has really emerged. Like we're seeing lots of patients that where we sequence the tumor, and there are multiple actionable biomarkers, and then it becomes a question of choosing which to start with and how to sequence those. That's a good problem to have, and it wasn't a problem we had a number of years ago.
Okay, thank you. Cristyn, I'm going to go back to you one more time because there's a great interest here in the topic still of reimbursement. So I'm going to let you sort of take us out here with some comments about what are some of the top tips that people need to bear in mind to optimize reimbursement alongside the optimal patient care that everyone's striving to make.
Yeah, I think there's three parts to, I think, of the reimbursement needs, right? And one I think we talked about was coding, right? So using the proper code. Two, you want to understand coverage and medical policy for this particular product or any products that you're using, right? So what does the coverage say? What is the criteria on the health plans? And then three, the operational requirements. In that, operational requirements are a big term, right? It could be prior authorization. Do I need to get prior authorization for this test or this code so that my claims go smoother? And then also, would an in-network or out-of-network contract help me in a situation like this? Doesn't matter. And so I think when you understand, okay, obviously coding's just coding, but obviously essential, and then medical policy, and then that third piece of any operational requirements will help with the reimbursement setting.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Fox, I'm going to give you the very last word, but again, take us through with some more comments about reimbursement.
Yeah, well, just to echo what, or to follow on with what Cristyn said, the advantages of the TSO Comprehensive are that the coding is well established now. The payer coverage policy is very clear with NCD 90.2 that they will reimburse any FDA-approved test with a CDX indication in a patient who has metastatic disease. And then finally, the reimbursement rates. Medicare will set those shortly by the end of the year in its CLFS CLFS for 2026. So I think for labs and in institutions and healthcare delivery systems that are interested in getting into this space in order to improve turnaround times, to improve patient care, this is an option. There are certainly other options. There are lots of commercial labs that provide excellent service out there, but we think that the addition of TSO Comprehensive to the armamentarium provides more options for delivery systems providing care for cancer patients.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate that comment. And I want to thank you and thank all of the panel. This has been a very stimulating and a very useful session. I'm sure you'll all agree who are in the audience. Just so you know, as to repeat, we will be posting this webinar on captodayonline.com in about a week. And if you're at all like me, I'm sure you'll want to review and then further deepen your involvement in these questions and deepen your involvement with all these wonderful folks at Illumina who can be so useful as you look to the future. So with that, let me thank our panelists. I want to thank Pierre Del Moral, who came on briefly with us in the recording. I want to thank Brian Piening, and I want to thank Cristyn Lauer, and of course, I want to thank Dr. John Fox. I want to thank, obviously, Illumina. You can see by all the things that they're doing, how anxious they are to be of use and help to all of you in your laboratories. And I want to thank, finally, all of you who've joined us today. I realize there's plenty of challenges. Workload is higher than I think ever before, and there's plenty of shortages, but I'm glad to bring you such a worthwhile session. I'm sure you'll agree. And I'm glad that you've taken time to join us today. So with that, I'll thank all once again and bring the webinar to a close. Thank you.